Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 201, New Prey. With Emma's directions, Kickle was quickly able to get us to the location where the courier was last spotted. It wasn't where they were attacked, but that was fine as we knew where they had been heading. Kickle had been right though, my runes or the hull blocked Emma's skills, so she was forced to remain on the top deck as we searched for our target, using a radio to communicate. I wanted to just build the functionality into the viewer, but I didn't understand the skill well enough to guess at how it worked. I certainly hadn't come across any items that allowed you to see traces of disturbed mana. I would have to think on it some more or grab the passive skill myself to learn more. For the time being, this would have to do. The radio crackled as Emma reported in. Despite our rocky start, she quickly took to her role without a complaint. I spotted the trail to the port side, turn 20 and we should have a straight shot. I didn't understand half of what she just said, but Kickle must have, as the ship swung slightly to the left of its previous heading. Kickle followed her directions for an entire day until we finally spotted a small dot on the horizon. Our speed was a major advantage, otherwise trying to catch this ship would have been useless. Kickle was the first to notice it. Ship spotted, Captain, pointing almost directly ahead of our current heading. I zoomed in and sure enough, it was a ship, moving away from us. Emma, time to get below, we have our target. She radioed back that she was coming inside and I engaged our stealth. That was the major disadvantage to requiring her to be outside the ship, stealth couldn't be engaged. There was a chance an enemy ship would spot us, but we had to risk it. I also learned another sobering fact from Emma. Apparently, the Retribution left a large, easy-to-follow trail in our wake. She said it resembled a ship 4 times its size and was confused as to why that would be. I had a good idea why that was happening, but I kept the information to myself. She didn't need to know that my ship could recharge itself by absorbing ambient mana. For all she knew, I charged it while I sat in my chair. Which was easy to believe since that's what I told everyone, and it was technically true since I kept an open charging path in each console for emergency use. How long until we catch up? I asked Kickle. Couple hours if we maintain this speed. May want to go wake Barkos up. I sighed at that. Barkos had indulged himself to excess again after having been restricted from alcohol for so long. He was currently sleeping it off, and the longer I gave him the less of a headache he would get when I cleansed it from his system. I'll wait until we're closer, I replied as Emma entered the command room. Her exposure to the 80-mile-per-hour winds for almost a full day hadn't seemed to affect her at all. Then again, she could just reform her current form to make any signs of fatigue vanish. She could even manipulate her clothing, and I suddenly get the uneasy feeling that she was always naked. Not that I thought of her that way, it just brought up bad memories of another woman that always went around naked near me. I shook off the memories and focused on our quarry. Any idea who we're chasing? I asked the two. I don't recognize the ship configuration, Captain. It looks like a bastardized hybrid of a Jerboa steamship and a dirigible vessel. But I can also see feathered oars, so it could be one of the few Dormian pirates. From what I understood, Dormians, the bird-like species around the Isles, didn't much like conflict. But there was always an exception to the rule, and some had gone full sociopath and embraced the bloodshed that life as a pirate offered. And apparently, they were quite feared for several reasons. The first was their ability to fly. An entire crew of Dormians could assault another ship without them having to get within weapons range. They were essentially aircraft carriers. They also tended to go the mage route, making them dangerous at a distance, even if you did surprise them. So they could shoot at you from range, land an overwhelming number of fighters aboard your vessel, and almost always outrun a ship thanks to their faster vessels. Going by Kickle's description, I had to assume that the target we were approaching was modified to be as fast as possible. You sure you want to take on this ship if it turns out to be Dormian pirates? Emma inquired. It won't be easy, but I think we can handle it. I'll go wake Barkos and tell him what's coming. I returned to the command room a few minutes later, having woken Barkos. The man was in the galley sucking down water for his headache. I knew the best way to deal with pirates was to surprise them, but as soon as I sat down, Kickle spoke up. Incoming flyers. Sure enough, when I looked up, I saw what appeared to be tiny specks separate from the ship. They must have spotted us trailing them. I cursed and dropped the cloak, engaging the shield. Kickle, get us within attack range of that ship, I'll try to keep the flyers off of us. Emma, it's up to you and Barkos to keep our deck clear until we close into attack range. Wait, what? She shouted. This isn't what I agreed to. Don't worry, I doubt you will have to do much with Barkos there. Speaking of, Barkos entered the command room just in time to hear my orders. He laughed and grabbed the angry woman, dragging her behind him. Come on, you'll be fine, it'll be like old times, I heard him say as they walked out. I would have gone as well, but someone needed to man the weapons. Our targets were small and normal monocannons would be useless in this situation due to their drop-off. But my monolasers were a straight beam of energy that traveled faster than a bullet. I would like to see them dodge the incoming fire from those. It didn't take long for the dots to close and resolve into 20 individuals. I heard Kickle say, that's a significant number and they don't look like slaves. I had to agree, it made this more likely to be a veteran pirate. I also spotted the enemy ship turning to engage us. Their ship was quick. The large feathered paddles were propelling it along as guns started to stick out from the side facing us. They weren't coming right at us though, but more an oblique angle, forcing us to turn to keep approaching, which would slow us down, or allow them to remain at the outer edge of their combat envelope. Which was smart if they assumed we had normal cannons. Once they realized we only had the monocannons, they would close in, just outside our effective range, and pummel the retribution from a distance. Or at least, that's what I would do given the situation. With that in mind, I waited to use the lasers, drawing the flying pirates in closer. This was easy to do since most personal spells or abilities had limited range. Still, energized arrows and bolts of magic soon began to appear from the enemy. Most miscalculated and missed us as we were faster than normal ships. They adjusted quickly though. I decided to wait no longer, returning fire. Unfortunately, all of the enemies were above the firing angle of my bottom guns. That left me with only one laser turret. I switched it to single fire mode, allowing me to fire each laser in the cluster separately. The first target was a mage and he was caught completely unaware as the beam tore through his shoulder, separating his arm from his torso. He corkscrewed out of the air while flailing about. I didn't spare any time for him though as I rotated the turret and fired again. But the enemy hadn't been idle, as some dove below the ship, others started moving erratically to keep me from targeting them. I deployed the underside lasers and started firing those as well. Without time to switch them to single-shot mode, a hit would likely vaporize anyone struck by a beam and 2 lucky pirates got to experience just that. I even spared another shot to the first target I hit as he must have recovered with a health potion. Too bad he lost all his speed and momentum as the beam tore through his head. The ship started to rock as more and more attacks started to land. But the shield was up to the task of holding off a few attacks. It wasn't until the enemy ship got in range that I started to worry. A full broadside from 4 full decks of cannons struck our shield, making the retribution jolt wildly about and throwing off my aim. One of my beams crossed over a target but it only caused severe burns as the beam didn't have time to remain on target long enough to inflict deadly damage. Fuck, get us closer to that ship, we need to disable it or it's going to tear us apart. I shouted. I knew Kickle was doing his best to evade fire but the enemy gunners must be highly trained or have some sort of skill because not a single shot missed on that first salvo. The shield had dropped to 70% and was recovering but we would be lucky to take 5 more volleys before the shield collapsed. I felt the tiny thuds as the pirates passed through the shield and landed on the deck. I saw the glitter of tossed bags similar to the ones the Legion used to try and board. It effectively rendered a small section of shield permeable while they flew through. I had thought about weaponizing the powder but the cost would be astronomical considering it was made from crushed monohearts and the effect was short-lived, the shield snapping back into place as soon as the dust passed through. I wasn't too worried about the boarders, already 2 of them were lying on the deck with daggers sticking out of their neck as Barkos carved a bloody path through them. Emma was holding her own as well, tricking pirates by taking the form of other pirates to get in close. I could see it wasn't always effective but she had 2 kills herself. She had no weapons but she was able to turn her appendages into deadly spikes of bone that she expertly aimed at vulnerable areas. I returned my attention to the weapons as Kickle shouted we were within range. I fired just as the enemy fired. Both of our ships jerked from the impacts but unlike the Retribution's shield, the enemy shield did not hold up to the massed fire. 3 of my beams cut through the enemy ship and out the other side. Nothing exploded though, so the attacks weren't very effective, except for maybe killing a few enemy crew. The pummeling went back and forth as the enemy realized they were on the losing end of this exchange. They tried to pull out of our range but the Retribution was able to keep pace without using the afterburners. Barkos and Emma had taken out the boarders, 10 in all had landed on the deck. The rest either tried to flee back to their ship, died in the initial assault, or fled toward the horizon. I ignored those as we pursued the enemy vessel. Wanting to try a different tack, I blew apart their magical oars, dropping their speed considerably. Then I unbuckled and headed to join Barcos and Emma. Keep the ship in their blind spot, we're gonna pay them a personal visit. Shoot down anything that comes our way. Kickle nodded as I exited the room. Chapter 202, Cutthroat. I exited the interior of the ship to see Barcos and Emma both waiting. Barcos with a bored expression, but I saw a slight smirk on his face. He was enjoying this. Then there was Emma. She was pissed, probably because I forced her to fight right after joining the crew, but I tended toward trials by fire and she survived. It also gave me a good idea of her fighting style in case I ever needed to deal with her. We're going to board the enemy ship, either of you have a way to fly over there? Emma harumphed as she sprouted a pair of bat-like wings under her arms. I realized they were an imitation of the Dormian wings. Barcos just chuckled, see you slowpokes over there, then he vanished like smoke in the wind. When I looked at the enemy ship, I saw the idiot sitting and waving as he kicked his feet off the rear of their ship. I just shook my head and cast my wings of the falcon along with blink step. It allowed me to zip past the still irate Emma who hadn't bothered to wait. As I closed on the vessel, the deck became a beehive of activity as pirates boiled out from below the deck. Some tried to fire magic at me, not realizing they already had an enemy in their midst. Barcos lazily picked off the remaining ranged fighters, making the approach a breeze. Somehow I didn't expect that to last. I was right. As I landed on the deck, the fighting began immediately. I only had a moment to glance at Barcos and notice he hadn't bothered to get off his perch and join me. I growled in annoyance as I ripped through fighter after fighter, healing the damage I took. The pirates weren't dumb, they were trying to either force me into a corner, where my staff would be less effective, or right off the edge of the boat. Not like that would help them much. I would just recast my wings and wade in again. My staff was a blur as I fought back against the press of bodies, smacking blade after blade away as I punched, kicked, headbutted, or simply blasted my attackers with magic. The fight wasn't my normal melee brawl where I had time to cast a fancy spell or come up with a unique way of dealing with my opponents. No, this was a marathon of violence as blood and broken bodies littered the deck. I knew Emma was somewhere aboard as well, but she had changed her disguise as I couldn't spot her amongst the press of bodies. I used everything I learned in my duels with Barcos, but even that wasn't enough as I was slowly pushed on the defensive. An enemy blade slipped through the defense of my staff, slicing a deep gash in my abdomen. Pain exploded through my body as whatever enchantment it was imbued with ripped through my body, making me tense up enough to take another blow. I screamed, unleashing Banshee's wail. It was super effective. Have you ever seen eardrums explode? Not simply rupture but explode, violently outward. Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. An entire swath of pirates dropped their weapons and clutched their ears while screaming. The distraction gave me enough time to cast an overcharged frost wave on another chunk of pirates. From there the battle turned in my favor as I ruthlessly smashed through the remaining uninjured pirates with a twisted grin on my face. I almost wished I had made the faceplate of my helmet transparent so they could see the joy I was taking in cutting them down. Already all of my wounds were healed, the status effect removed with cleanse, and my body was on fire as my bones absorbed the collected reservoir of energy from the cumulative damage I had taken during the fight. When it was just me and 3 other pirates, they broke. One tried to dive off the side, I hit him with an energy lance, blasting him across the deck. Another I hit with my new spell Tempest Ball. Turns out if you have a high enough intelligence, the ball becomes a massive globe of water that can encompass an entire person. The Dormian struggled futilely as the currents of the spell continued to drag him back inside until he eventually ran out of breath and drowned. I was about to finish the last one off when a dagger appeared in his throat. I heard Barcos drop down to the deck from behind me and clap. I glared at him. You could have helped. I did, see, he said, pointing to the man choking and trying to wrench the bloody dagger out. Besides, you looked like you were having too much fun, I didn't want to spoil that for you. I grunted in annoyance as I walked over to the last man and kicked him hard under the chin, snapping his head back and breaking his neck. Emma took that moment to walk from below deck, holding a bloody ear. Got the captain, so what do you want to do with the ship? I couldn't even be annoyed with her for being absent during the fight since she was doing what she was hired to do, sneak in and be the silent blade when we couldn't. As for her question, I hadn't really thought about it. I just wanted to let loose. I certainly didn't need another ship, especially one as roughed up as this one had gotten during our fight, but then again, I'm sure I could sell it. Barcos, Can you teleport back and tell Kickle and tell him to bring the retribution around to the bow, we're going to tow our prize to the nearest port. That seemed to get smiles out of these two. I'm sure once Kickle heard, he would be smiling as well. Towing the ship turned out to be a bit of a challenge, but we figured it out. Someone did need to remain aboard to steer the new vessel though. I decided Barcos could do it since he pissed me off. Mostly it meant he had no access to the extensive alcohol collection aboard my ship, not that I thought the pirates didn't have their own supply, but let him drink that up first. It was a bit nerve-wracking, towing the ship as neither could deploy shields during the journey. We could separate the ships in a moment if needed though. Thankfully, we never had to test that, not that we didn't see a few ships on the horizon, but apparently, 2 ships together were enough to keep any pirates looking for a quick score away. I doubt they could even tell the ships were tied together, as none ventured even close. We did get some odd looks as we coasted into the port, where we finally separated the slow and damaged vessel so it could dock, and we took an adjacent dock. Turns out selling a ship, especially a souped up even though it was significantly damaged pirate ship, was quite easy. It sold for over 200,000 credits and the loot we found aboard sold for another 80,000. Then there was the bounties, yup, more than one apparently. All in all a good haul, not that I cared about the money, I had spent over 4 times that amount to build the retribution. But it was enough to restore any costs I had incurred since I arrived in the Isles of Mist, and that was with my quarter split. Seeing as we were all pretty flush with money, I let the others take a few days to rest and relax, or party it up. They certainly earned it. I did take the time to look at my stats and the few skills I had managed to swipe during my orgy of violence. There had been a number of magical weapons among the pirates. I let the others take their pick, the rest went into the armory aboard ship since I didn't need the money. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 21 19ths. Strength, 20, plus 2, modifier x22. Endurance, 20 modifier x40. Agility, 20, plus 2, modifier x22. Perception, 18 modifier x22. Intelligence, 25 modifier x40. Wisdom, 16 modifier x22. Charisma, 11 modifier x22. Luck, 16 modifier x22. HP, 800, 880. Stamina, 400, 440. Stamina Riggin, M880. Mana, 1000. Mana Riggin, M352. My second class had now hit 19. I fully expected by the end of my pirate hunting, that it would hit 20. No clue what that would entail. I didn't think a third class was an option, and if someone like Barcos hadn't gone down that route, it seemed unlikely. Really, I was just looking forward to taking strength, endurance, and agility to the second tier. Maw of the Void was nice for a variety of skills, but very few of those skills were ever all that impressive. I still liked the class though, it had some of my more colorful skills. Speaking of skills, I looked at what I got from the rabble. Blind Strike. Cursed Wound. Solid Footing. Crippling Slash. None of them were very impressive. Blind Strike allowed me to hit my target even if I couldn't see them. Which, given my ability to heal and my reflexes, was pretty pointless. Cursed Wound was okay, except it required the curse to come from a source. Since I had nothing that generated curses, it was rather useless for me. Solid Footing was just a crutch for someone with low agility. Seriously, it only gave an increased chance to not slip or fall in adverse conditions. Lame. Crippling Slash was also useless for me since they, no slashing weapons. It would probably work with my blade staff, but I rarely used that. Certainly not enough to make holding onto a skill for a single weapon worthwhile. I chucked all 4 to Void Lottery to see what I got. Daylily, causes a flower to bloom. The Daylily banishes all darkness in a 10m circle. Requires soil and water. Permanent. Cost 10 mana, cooldown 15 SEC. Horn of Mechai Cat, summons a horn. If you blow on the horn, Mechai Cat will hear your call. If your faith is pure, he will send a guardian to assist you. Cost 75 mana, cooldown 1 hour. I sighed. While Daylily was useful, it wasn't all that great. Maybe if I got bored I could make a trail of the flowers. As for the horn, yeah, that sounded like faith-based magic and I wasn't touching that. I tried to get rid of it along with that stupid glob spell, but I was unable to select glob for Void Lottery or cast it to the void using reclaim. I didn't like that. I didn't know what it might mean, but it probably wasn't anything good. For now, all I could do was ignore the issue and move on to other things. My newest runic invention was almost complete. And seeing as we were docked for the next few days, I might even have time to install it. The effect of the device wasn't unique, I had built a similar device to help protect St. June. The drainer was a bit more challenging to weaponize than I had first realized. The hardest part was constraining the effect and amplifying it to be more of a focused beam. This turned out to be a material issue instead of a runic one. I also couldn't focus it as tightly as I wished. What I was left with was what looked like a silver traffic cone attached to a fat stick. Said fat stick was covered in a complex array of runes. The entire cone had to be made from mithril and coated in runes to protect the surface from the rampant energy of the device. I could have used a cubic design instead of the stick, to make my life easier, but I wanted to be able to swap the device into my current weapon pods without having to modify anything. I decided that the top forward-mounted monocannons on the Retribution were going to be replaced by the Null Beam. Yet, Null Beam was a much cooler-sounding name than Drainer. It was also much closer to the weapon's actual function. Concentrating the entire focus of the draining function into a cone massively increased the effect it had. It would now wipe out most magic with a single burst. This would normally be an issue since that much power rushing into a monoheart at once would easily overwhelm even the large core my ship used. I didn't think it was enough to make the core explode, but it may crack it or damage other sensitive components. So I had to figure out what to do with the extra power the device drew in. Well, why not power another weapon? Above the cone sat what looked like a much larger monocannon. And it was. Except that this monocannon only drew energy from the cone instead of having its own internal monoheart capacitor. I hadn't been able to test it out yet, but I knew a few things would differ with this weapon, compared to a normal monocannon. The energy released would be much stronger, but it also wouldn't be all in one concentrated burst. More like a mono-flamethrower, still devastating but not in the same explosive way. It's probably good that it didn't act the same way as a monocannon. I hadn't ever been able to get my runic monocannons to output at the same level as the enchanted ones, so I doubted the weapon would remain intact if I had managed to compress all that energy into one ball of energy. I finished assembling the device and checked it over one more time before nodding. It was time to install it. Chapter 203, The Hunters. Ulk and Zif stepped out of the portal of the bazaar. Zif's tentacles twitched in distaste at the thin environment before he reached out to his partner mentally. Do you have a trail? This wasn't the first time asking this question, nor the first bazaar on this strange world they had exited from. But the priests had assured them this was the correct world, and so they came. The cost to hop from bazaar to bazaar was expensive, but there was no other way to start locating what they were sent to find. He waited while Ulk twisted his tentacles in the air, using whatever skill he had that allowed him to find their target. Zif remained alert though, watching the less than friendly emotions rolling off the locals as they passed by. He assumed they were giving the two of them dirty looks, but he wasn't well versed in alien physiology. Trail. Close. Ulk sent back with his limited telepathic ability. Zif scanned his companion's thoughts to locate the next destination. He would have done this all the time, but it was easier to get images than it was to access thoughts. Once he got a clear image from Ulk's surface thoughts, he opened a rift and teleported the two of them past the enchantments and into a small room with two individuals. Lord Victi was busy discussing the ongoing stalemate with St. June and how they had surprised them with their damnable smaller ships, essentially neutralizing his advantage of airship power before it even got off the ground. Do we have any idea how many ships they possess? He asked Ashlam. So far we have spotted 5. On their own, they aren't much of a threat, but they are more nimble than our ships and they have those modified monocannons. Lord Victi muttered a curse and was thinking about ways around the issue when 2 alien visitors popped into existence behind Ashlam. He was so surprised by their appearance that he hesitated a moment. Nobody should be able to simply teleport past his wards. Thankfully Ashlam was a seasoned fighter and didn't hesitate after seeing his expression. The man blurred into action almost immediately. Be still and silent. The mental command seemed to roll through the room from the floating cephalopod-like beings, making everyone freeze. The command was all-encompassing, making it so Lord Victi couldn't even breathe, he couldn't move, even his awareness of what was going on around him had become fuzzy. For the first time in many years, Lord Victi was terrified. Ulk and Zif floated through the frozen room. Ulk used his tentacles to touch and feel the life forms within the room, looking for clues while Zif restrained the beings with little effort on his half. They were weak, less than half his level, so there was no surprise there. Nothing Ulk sent telepathically, moving on to the second smaller creature behind the weapon-wielding one. He repeated the process, probing the creature's timeline for any clues. Interaction. Faint. Prior. Zif responded with a telepathic nod and the two vanished, moving on to the next link in the chain. By the time the skill wore off, Lord Vic T was blue in the face. He collapsed to the ground, sucking in deep lungfuls of air. He imagined the experience was much like drowning and he never wanted to have to go through it ever again. Never had he been placed in such a vulnerable position. As his senses returned he got shakily to his feet. He noticed Ashlam was either unconscious or dead as the man lay sprawled out on the ground with his sword scattered to the corner of the room after it fell from his lifeless hand. Lord Vic T activated his emergency enchantment and a host of guards rushed into the room shortly after to try and see what the issue was. We were attacked. Gather the guards and activate all the wards in case they return. If I find out anyone was shirking their duties during this time I will personally punish them, am I clear? The guards nodded. Good, get to it and check to see if Ashlam is alive or not. Ashlam did survive, although, it took the man a few minutes to regain consciousness. Lord Vic T didn't even berate him for his complete ineffectiveness in the face of an enemy, he knew a high-leveled enemy when he saw it, even if his quick identify, before getting frozen, only returned question marks. What he didn't know was the who or why. Ashlam was able to supply the who. They are known as Void Hunters, my lord. I don't know much about them as their race is rather reclusive. All I know is to stay out of their way as they will destroy anything they need to get at their target. But why come here and attack us? Did you hear their telepathic conversation? No, my lord. I attacked and then I couldn't move, everything else was distorted. Lord Vic T could puzzle over the why of that later. For now, he told his captain everything he heard, although, it wasn't much. He figured it was a side effect of his family's enchantments. Maybe he could market that. It makes no sense, Ashlam mumbled, we haven't encountered anything that would put us on their radar, you especially, except Paul Fuller. Lord Vic T finished for him. Lord Vic T smiled. Well, this may end up working in our favor then. If these hunters are looking for this man, for whatever reason, it is unlikely he will enjoy it when they finally catch up to him. For now, keep up our aerial patrols but don't engage the enemy ships. I have people looking for this Paul and have a good idea of where he might be. If we get confirmation of his death, then we can assault the city in force. Screams and confusion suffused the population of Houston. Something or someone had attacked. Nobody had died but the people were fresh off 2 other attacks and fear and paranoia were at a high causing mass panic. The 2 beings floated through the chaos, ignoring anyone that ran away from them and only freezing the minds of those that tried to attack. Trail. Old. Many. Ulk sent. Zif flexed his tentacles in annoyance. Most of his frustration stemmed from the single-word mental replies he got from his companion. He knew it couldn't be helped. Sending a multi-word reply telepathically was draining for a non-telepath, especially in this weak environment. He longed for the crushing depths and silence of the home world. But he needed to be vigilant for the mission. As a hunter, he didn't fear reprisals from the locals. Even if they did become strong, no outsider would survive the crushing depths of Kix to even attempt it. It's why hunter teams never bothered asking for information, why bother when you could just take what you need and move on. The 2 of them continued their investigation through the town, leaving a trail of stunned and frozen people behind them and at least 1 corpse. They eventually found another link and Ulk was stripping the being's timeline for clues. But the being behind the mind was resisting, it never ended well for those that resisted. Recent clue. Lead was all Zif needed to hear. He transported them to the next location. As soon as they left, the body of Jim Moores collapsed to the ground and lay still and quiet. The arrival at the next location was met with surprise. Instead of arriving where Zif had wanted to, they appeared outside a wall on an open rocky plateau. Alarms blared in the distance causing Zif to recoil slightly at the harsh discordant wail. For a moment he mistook the sound for a predator from his home world. Thankfully it wasn't a sonic attack and he quickly recovered. Soon after the noise, beams of bright lights swept across the ground and quickly oriented on the pair. Zif twitched a tentacle and a dome of telekinetic force sprang into being, deflecting the incoming magical attacks that followed. He wasn't worried about them breaching his barrier, they were far weaker than anything on his home world. Trail. Multitude. Ulk quivered in excitement. Zif ignored his partner's excitement and just pushed forward, ignoring the increasing volley of incoming fire as he twisted 2 of his appendages to form a circle in order to cast Void Lance, removing a large hole in the wall in front of them, allowing the pair to float straight through. The defenders of the city tried to fight them off, but nothing they did could even harm the pair. They did encounter one creature, but the hell beast was quickly dispatched with a hammer of telekinetic force. Ulk dug through the minds of anyone with a scent of the target before he ran into an issue. Trail. Unknown. Unknown. Unknown, his companion repeated in agitation. Ziff sighed internally at his rookie companion's agitation. He should have asked for an experienced hunter for this mission, but they were busy. Instead, he slapped Ulk with a tentacle to admonish him to keep his cool and approached one of the frozen humans, the Hell Beast summoner, he realized, and dug through its mind. While the result wasn't as accurate as Ulk's Void Hunter skills, he was able to trace a path. They would pick up the trail again, it was only a matter of time. The two vanished, heading south. Martin screamed in agony as his lungs returned to working order. His head felt like someone had dipped it in acid and split it open. With shaky limbs, he managed to stand. He wobbled over to check on Ska, his new chief of the guard, and make sure he was all right. He seemed to be fine, only unconscious. Martin let out a sigh of relief, collapsing to the ground, his energy spent. As he lay there, he could only be glad that Fiona had remained at home. He couldn't imagine whatever skill was used to disable Ska and him would have been good for their unborn child. And she didn't have the safety of being able to go incorporeal while she was pregnant. His mind went to the two dark blue floating squid-like creatures that attacked. As his mind slowly cleared, he got a picture of what they wanted from the memories they accessed. He shuddered just thinking about these creatures and what they might be capable of. After the fight with Lord Vic-T and his forces, Martin had upgraded his identify skill to something called True Sight. That one skill bankrupted his entire finances, but it was worth it. It could cut through most abilities that hid class or level information, and it also didn't have an upper limit on the level it could identify. He looked at the messages he got after using it on the two creatures and hoped Paul would be able to avoid an encounter with him, because Martin knew they were here for Paul. And with no way to contact him, as he was out of range, there would be no warning for Paul if they did show up. Ulk Void Hunter / Maw of the Void 47/41. Ziff Psy Commando / Maw of the Void 45/42. Chapter 204, Surprise Party. I disconnected the 3 monocannons from the front-mounted turret and inspected them. There were signs of damage from use. I frowned, pulling out a notebook and scribbling down my findings. I didn't really need the notebook with my almost perfect memory, but it was faster to look at a log than it was to dig through my random memories. I would need to overhaul my monocannon design if they were degrading this quickly. I had hoped that the titanium would have held up better, but it was only a mundane metal as compared to the mithril inlay for the runes. A full refit would be in order shortly, and I made a note to purchase more mithril and find a better substitute metal for the majority of the weapon. The new null beam wouldn't have any of those issues, being made from mostly mithril. If the cost wouldn't have bankrupted me, I would have done the same for all my weapons. Sliding in the new weapon was a bit of a challenge. It fit, it was just heavy and ungainly. I wished some of the others had remained behind to help, but they needed a break and I needed a break from them. Eventually, with enough jockeying, the weapon clicked into place. I pulled out my tablet and rotated the turret, making sure it worked properly. I did note one issue and had to limit the travel up and down on the weapon to prevent the cone from slamming into the deck plating. I also set it so the null beam or the cannon could not fire if it crossed over the ship. That would end in a really bad day for the Retribution if it did. In hindsight, I should probably do that for the rest of my weapons as well. I switched the turret to its storage mode and it returned to a small cradle that popped out of the deck to hold it steady. The cradle didn't exactly fit properly anymore, but it was good enough for now. I spent the next hour inspecting the top deck turrets and grimacing as I saw the deterioration. My large surplus of cash wasn't looking so large anymore. I glanced at the sky. It was starting to get dark, but maybe if I got lucky some of the merchants, that sold materials, would still be open. I jumped off the deck and onto the dock, only for a very confused man to appear at the end of the dock. If it wasn't for his naked blade, I may have mistaken this for an honest error. But he didn't know I had the defenses of the Retribution online. That included the much improved teleportation scrambler field I developed. The man was quick to realize the issue as he tried to rush me, but without surprise on his side, I had time to prepare myself. My armor covered me a moment later. I would have held off on taking my staff out, but a moment later another dozen or so attackers appeared at the end of the dock. So either the first attacker had jumped the gun or was inexperienced in combat. I didn't recognize his species, but it was clearly something reptilian as I saw scales. I decided to remain where I was, using the ship's defenses to my advantage. I only wished I had engaged the full offensive option when I set the defenses. Oh well, hindsight and all that. I dodged a wad of high-speed spit, no doubt it was probably acidic knowing my luck. 3 more spitballs were launched at me before the lizard man crossed the remaining distance. He roared in a challenge and I felt a skill try to compel me into battle. Using a play from Barkos's book, I acted like I was enraged and made to attack the man with my fist. I saw the gleam of victory in the man's eye as his curved sword sliced through the air toward my neck. I imposed my hand in the blade's path and the evil grin on the creature's face only grew wider as it thought it was going to slice straight through my hand. When my hand latched onto the blade, preventing it from moving or cutting, I saw the look of confusion dawning on his face. It was a bit too late though as I rapid cast a series of spells. Multicast and Time Shudder made it seem like it was instant. First, my staff appeared in my offhand, and with a blur, I shoved the lion's head of the weapon into my attacker's chest but before it impacted I cast an overcharged shockwave. The combined attacks had an interesting effect. Almost half of the man's torso simply exploded into ribbons of pink mist. It was enough of a display of power to make the rest of the attackers pause for a moment, but only a moment. They were warier now but they still charged toward me, having me significantly outnumbered made up for any hesitancy on their part. I threw the remains of the corpse at the incoming attackers and followed quickly behind it. If they wanted to dance, I would be a poor host if I refused them. I started laughing, activating maddening laugh as I engaged Aura of Rage for the first time in a long time. The extra stat points settled on me and I felt the weight but it wasn't as crushing as it had been before. I smiled maniacally inside my helmet as I realized my armor was working as intended to reinforce my skeleton and body. I twisted out of the way of a harpoon and fired an annihilator sphere right down the middle of the clustered enemy. The first man dove out of the path of my spell, getting knocked over by another attacker as they ran into each other but the man behind him wasn't able to avoid the spell in time. I purposefully aimed low and as expected the spell impacted the man's pelvis and simply made it vanish into dust. He didn't even get a chance to scream as his body fell over dead, oh but the 2 idiots close to him did as the spell rendered their hips to gaping bloody holes. With my initial attack disrupting their charge, the enemy decided to drop any pretense of stealth, and spells and skills began to fly through the air toward me. I activated Point Defense and injected a mana potion before I activated Charge and Blink Step. That was one thing I learned during my limited hunting. Most airship pirates did not use speed burst skills like mine, because space was limited on ships and most skills like that would cause you to simply run off the edge of the ship or run into someone. Instead, most had a flight skill of some sort. 3 of the attackers took to the air, trying to pepper my defenses with ranged attacks as I crashed into an axe-wielding man. I felt the blade impact my shoulder with a crunch but I ignored the pain as I whipped my hand across his throat like a knife. The metal of my fake hand tore his throat out and wrenched his head to the side hard enough to snap his neck thanks to my empowered strength. I activated another Time Shudder, rewinding time to avoid a beam of white light aimed at my skull. I returned the attack with an energy lance of my own, clipping the flying mage on the shoulder and throwing him from the air. I didn't get a kill notice for it though. By this time other people had noticed the commotion and I could distinctly hear bells going off in the background but I tuned them out as I snapped a devastating kick into the face of the man that avoided my Annihilator Sphere attack. There was a crunch as his skull caved under the force of my kick but I was already turning as a blade skittered across my armor, leaving a deep groove. I snapped my staff down on that attacker's arm, while simultaneously activating Imbue on my staff. The fire exploded across the man's clothing as he screamed and fell back but I tuned that out as well, grabbing yet another attacker's arm as his dagger stabbed into my side. I felt the poison coursing through my body but I ignored it as I crushed the man's forearm in my grip while activating my 3-spell combo. Calcifying Strike, Festering Wound, and Corrupting Touch. And for good measure, I kicked him in the balls. When I stepped back, avoiding a glaive to the neck, I cast Rejuvenate and Cleanse on myself. The minor wounds I had taken all healed up and the poison was nothing special, being purged without issue from my system. There were only a few remaining attackers but seeing as how they were getting stomped hard, they chose that moment to flee. I could have chased after them but what was the point? I could already see the town guard going after the few survivors. I didn't even bother finishing off the surviving injured, storing my staff as 4 armed guards ran down the pier towards the carnage. And it was carnage. I looked around at all the blood, the burn marks, and the holes in the deck that I had somehow not even been aware of as I fought on and I sighed, knowing that it was going to be a hassle to explain myself out of this predicament. Turns out it wasn't all that hard. The 2 surviving pirates agreed to talk if I stopped the skills that were killing them. I shrugged and agreed, healing the deadly attacks but leaving them still injured. The guards questioned me on what happened, and if the retribution was my ship. I told them it was, and they seemed to be aware of it and my reputation, since it wasn't every day that someone dragged a pirate ship in to sell. I also learned that there was a bounty on my head and any of my crew from another pirate by the name of Tukath. I remembered the name, but I hadn't actually encountered this pirate and was confused as to why he would have placed a bounty on me or my crew. The unaffiliated pirate survivors didn't know either, they just wanted to collect a quick payday by taking me down, seeing as I was alone. It's possible other nefarious people had gone after Barkos and the others, but I wasn't too worried about them. Out of all of them, Emma was the weakest fighter, but I thought she had the best ability to extricate herself from danger if it occurred. Eventually, the guards hauled off the 2 surviving captured pirates and gave me a fine for disturbing the peace. I was a bit shocked at that, but there wasn't much I could do. They also told me the dockmaster would charge me for all damages to the dock or any cleanup that needed to be done. The pricks didn't even let me loot the bodies of the pirates I killed, claiming it as evidence. Evidence my ass, pricks would probably split it amongst themselves as a job well done. I decided I had enough excitement for the night. After hosing the blood off the dock with regenerating rain, I jumped back aboard Retribution and went to bed. I would have a long day tomorrow of collecting resources and making repairs. Although, I was tempted to say fuck it and go get shit-faced with the others. But the responsibilities of being a captain made me decide that wasn't a good idea. When I woke up the next morning, I could hear someone snoring in one of the adjacent cabins. I sighed. That was one downside of having such a small ship, there wasn't a whole lot of privacy. I got a quick shower in and set about cleaning the grime from my armor. The damages may have repaired themselves, but it wasn't self-cleaning. Perhaps I would add that in a future iteration, but I didn't see this armor being replaced anytime soon. My body was sore from the exertion of the previous evening and I moved with deliberate slowness, letting my aching muscles relax. Even my bones felt tired. I knew it was a side effect of my aura of rage. While my body was better off than in the past, it was still a strain and I would have to use it sparingly as I slowly improved my body. I doubted it would ever fully go away, but so long as it didn't leave me crippled I was fine with that. Kickle was the first to rise, and he looked like shit. His eyes were bloodshot and his fur was limp. I didn't even know that was possible until I saw it. He made his way to the fridge and grabbed a juice that helped him perk up a bit. I see you had an interesting night, I stated as I continued cleaning my armor. Ugh, I sometimes forget I am no longer as young as I once was. Speaking of exciting nights, he said, gesturing to my bloody armor. Oh, yeah, apparently a pirate named Tukath put a bounty on all of us. Kickle grunted, yeah, that guy's a real prick. He used to run with some of those pirates at that hideout we destroyed, probably still does. I'm sure he heard we turned in that flag, not hard to put 2 and 2 together after that. Anything we need to worry about? Kickle rubbed his chin in thought before shrugging. Not any more than usual for being a pirate hunter, it was bound to happen sooner or later, part of doing business. It might even work in our favor, slip a few contacts our location and then bait a trap for the idiots that come to collect. I didn't have to think too long about that. Alright, get Emma to do it though, she will be more subtle about it. I need to purchase some materials from the market, the weapons need an overhaul. Kickle just nodded, seeming to not be too surprised by my statement. And he probably wasn't. The cannons used by pirates were pretty wasteful energy-wise, I couldn't imagine they would hold up forever to the massive bursts of mana that they were forced to contain. So they would need to be repaired periodically as well. Chapter 205, Repairs. The next day was rather uneventful. Kickle showed me where to purchase the materials I needed to repair the ship. Really it was more of an upgrade because I had plenty of spare monolasers and cannons to replace the damaged ones on the ship, but I saw no point with continuing to use subpar material. Since I couldn't afford to make the weapons from pure mithril, I grabbed a few different types of magical metals to test with. They would all work fine, but I wanted to find the best possible option for cost versus longevity. It was pricey to get the materials, but nothing compared to what it might have cost if I had to repurchase the mithril. I simply stripped the mithril from the damaged turrets and most of the spares. Since we were docked, I couldn't access the underside turrets to replace them at the moment. I would just create the replacements for now and have us set down on some out-of-the-way rock for an hour while I swapped them out, away from prying eyes. The hardest part was figuring out how to work with each metal. Each metal had some unique quality that made molding it difficult. Volanite was an attuned metal and one I was eager to try out. I learned about attuned metals months ago but never really looked into using them as I had no real need to. What made Volanite unique was its attunement to electricity. The merchant said it was attuned to lightning, but that was an oversimplification on his part. It was a bit of an odd metal with a milky coloration. Fire did little to soften the metal for molding, so I was forced to use a constant low voltage current while I worked with it. Ever try molding a live electrical wire? It wasn't pleasant even if it didn't cause me a whole lot of damage. The next metal I worked with was called chard. It was a bit like obsidian and had an almost glass-like consistency. But it was dark blue and radiated heat away as fast as you could apply it to the metal. Great for anti-fire enchantments, not so easy when you needed to heat it up. I eventually figured out the trick to working with the metal. I built a small kiln and flooded it with lava. The chard could radiate the heat away, but if the surrounding area was already saturated with the heat, it had no place to go and would remain in the metal. Working quickly, I was able to form it into the desired shapes and carve in the necessary runes. I really hoped this wasn't the magical metal I would need, because it was just a pain to work with. The last material I purchased was a sort of ceramic powder made from the crushed bones of magical beasts. This was the most labor-intensive material to work with, but was the easiest to manipulate in the end. It didn't require anything fancy and was as easy to carve as soft clay in its unfired state. Since I already had a kiln, heat treating the finished results was easy. The reason I purchased this material was due to some magical trinkets in the shop where I purchased it. The items looked to be the same color and consistency as the mana cannons I had stolen from the dwarves. I asked the shop owner what they were made from, and the man immediately tried to sell me on buying some of the powder, calling jewelry making a fine hobby. I didn't need it as a hobby, but if it was what I thought it would be worth purchasing. I purchased way more than I needed and probably made the merchant's year, but I figured it was a wise investment even if it didn't pan out for what I intended. So now I had 2 of each weapon made from each new material. Since the monolasers came in groups of 4, I simply swapped out the main cannon on the top deck with 1 each of the new materials and 1 of the old titanium replacements that were undamaged. I was going to do the same with 1 of the mana cannons on the underside. Since those only held a cluster of 3 barrels, I would have to compare the results with another turret. The whole process of manufacturing took me 3 days. The others didn't waste that time idling on the ship. Well, Barkos did, but he was still sleeping off his hangover. Kickle and Emma had gone out and resupplied the ship. Now Kickle was below doing inventory and storing everything where it needed to go, while Emma was out in disguise trying to find out more about this pirate that put a bounty on us and lay the groundwork to bait him into a trap. I was eating a ham sandwich in the galley when she returned. "Welcome back," I said with a mouthful of food. That got a mild chuckle out of Barkos, but Emma just glared at me. "Just because we're hunting pirates, doesn't mean we need to act like animals. Chew and swallow before speaking." I grinned, swallowing the food in my mouth and washing it down with some water. "Yes, Mom. How did your mission go?" She gave me one last dirty look before sighing. She probably figured that was the best she was gonna get out of me. Some parts went well, others not so much. I was able to infiltrate a few pirate outfits within the town. Unfortunately, none of them worked for this Tukath. And I don't know how good my efforts will be since none of these local pirates even have a ship. I snorted, hard to even call them pirates if they don't have a ship. "So, what do we do?" She shrugged. "They know where we will be in 2 weeks. All we need to do is wait there and see who shows up to try and attack us. Even if this Tukath doesn't hear about this information, some other pirate will." "All right. Well, Kickle should be in the command room. Work with him on the details. We have 1 stop to make for some minor repairs, then we can head to this location. I would like to arrive with plenty of time to spare." She nodded and ducked down the hall to the command room. "Could be more trouble than we can handle," Barkos said. I looked over at the man. He had finally come out of his bunk and was nursing a strong drink, something akin to coffee but dialed up to 11. "You think the pirates will work together to try and take us out?" "It's possible. Although the pirates would have to trust each other enough to see it through. I doubt that will be the case. But that doesn't mean a dozen pirates won't show up trying to collect our bounty." I smiled. "Well, I have a new toy to test out if they do." Kickle set the retribution down on some small island, devoid of people or towns. There was very little vegetation and no natural water source, making it uninhabitable for long-term use. There were far more islands like this one than there were habitable islands within the Isles. It was one of the reasons it was hard to even find some of the pirate hideaways. Smart merchants stayed within normal shipping lanes. Detoring was not a wise idea unless you had the firepower to back it up. We did. I quickly got to work swapping out the rest of the worn-out weapons. We would be hanging out here for a few days. I wanted more hands-on training with Barkos and wanted to see what Emma brought to the table. That's the last one, I said, wiping the sweat from my face as I slid the last replacement into place. I don't understand why you are replacing them all so soon, Barkos said as he watched me, but didn't offer to help. Not that I wanted him mucking about with the weapons. These are mostly untested weapons. Better to replace them now instead of finding out mid-fight that half of them failed. I understand that, he rolled his eyes, what I mean is why are they so chintzy that they are failing this quickly? They aren't low quality, I argued, besides, how many people do you know that we're able to reverse engineer a guild monocannon? One, he replied without missing a beat. I just shook my head. Whatever. I was in a bit of a rush when I was making them, so I used whatever material I had in abundance. I never had any issue with my other enchanted items failing, so didn't even realize it was a possibility. Good, now that you can admit that you made a mistake, you can improve. It's much the same with fighting, only if you make a mistake while fighting, you are probably going to die. I turned to the man. Wait, did you just insult my crafting to use as a teaching opportunity? He simply smiled and walked away. That prick. I didn't have any skills to set up a three-way duel, but apparently, Barkos did. We were standing on a rocky stretch of ground a few hundred feet from the ship. Just Barkos, Emma, and me. Kickle said he was too old to learn something new and bowed out from further training. I figured he didn't want to get his ass handed to him by Barkos. I kinda wished I had that luxury. The three of us faced off without weapons or armor. This was a test of our ability to adapt to an ambush situation. I already knew I was the lone man out for dealing with this sort of thing. Barkos gave the signal to start and the two of them rushed me, some unspoken agreement between them. Joke's on them though, I had ground under my feet, so had full access to my skills. I combined Seismic Strike with Earth Fist by casting Time Shudder to activate them at the same time. I knew one wasn't enough to catch either of the two off guard, but was hoping both at the same time would trip one of them up. Of course, the smart play would be to take Barkos out first, but I knew that wasn't going to happen as I still hadn't managed to hit him in any bout. So I went after Emma. The rippling rock slowed her only slightly as she morphed her lower body to that of some quadruped. Too bad she wasn't expecting the pillar of rock to shoot up at her torso. She was quick to react though, only taking a glancing blow from my attack. I wasn't done though as I threw clinging spray her way and danced back to avoid a quick jab from a bored-looking Barkos. I saw the man snap a kick at my leg to knock me to the ground and I cast Unstoppable Force. I felt the blow land, but my spell absorbed the impact, allowing me to snap out a kick of my own toward the man's head. If he was surprised by my ability to absorb his attack, he didn't show it, easily avoiding my return kick. I was forced once more on the defensive as Emma joined the fight. Her attacks were fast and brutal but rather straightforward. She would morph her arms into spears of bone while staying far enough away that I couldn't counter without a weapon. Her attacks were about as subtle as a charging rhinoceros, which was weird considering her profession. I used that fact to my advantage when she used her other trick, switching her bone spear into a flexible tentacle to try and wrap my arm and pull me off balance. I imbued my body with electricity, catching her completely off guard. Even Barkos jumped back to avoid a swing I sent his way instead of trying to slap it aside contemptuously like he had so many others. I did see him smile slightly before I reeled Emma in, concentrating the imbued element into my elbow and smashed it into the stunned woman's face before she could respond. There was a crack as the lightning discharged into her body and flung her limp form across the rocky terrain. I turned my attention to Barkos as he slowly walked outside of my easy reach. Well, that's a nifty trick. But how long can you keep it up? If this had been my body from only 6 months ago, probably not long. But with my improved physique from the enchantment in my armor, I could probably keep it going for 10 or so minutes. Maybe that was enough time to finally get a hit in and knock the smirk off Barkos's cocky face. It was not. I lay on the ground groaning as I stared up at the sky. In the background, I could hear Barkos chuckling to himself as he walked away. He had used some ability to block the energy from entering his body as he kicked my feet out from under me, elbowed me in the neck, and tossed me over his shoulder like I weighed no more than a few pounds in a rapid series of moves that I had no time to counter. Then he simply ended the duel. It was probably for the best. Emma was still out cold from my attack and hadn't rejoined the fight. Turns out Elixians were highly sensitive to electrical attacks. Who knew? While the damage was healed as soon as the fight ended, she would take time to come around. I hadn't known that at the time. I only used what I knew about normal human anatomy and how it responded to a jolt of electricity. Even though I failed to defeat Barkos, I declared it a partial victory. I had effectively fought off 2 attackers, disabled one, and forced Barkos to use a skill. I gave a tired smile at that. Slowly but surely I was getting better. Chapter 206, Ambush. I anxiously sat in my chair in the command room. We had arrived at the location of our ambush a week ahead of schedule in order to allow any possible disturbed mana trail to dissipate and not give away our position. The island in question was a small pirate trading port. It only remained in existence because it wasn't worth the effort to take it out. The small island wasn't self-sufficient, meaning nobody wanted to take it from the pirates that called it home. And there were enough weapons around the small island to fight off a fleet of ships, making the expense of any endeavor not worth it. Unfortunately, there was no convenient rock ceiling that I could drop on the small port city like last time. So subduing the port would be a difficult affair, not that I planned on doing that. Although, I did briefly toy with the notion of using the null beam to make the island fall from the sky. I quickly dismissed that idea as futile since the amount of mana ingrained in the stone that made up these islands would quickly overwhelm my new weapon's ability to draw it away. Besides, our target would never believe we meant to assault this port by ourselves. So trying to convince them that that was our plan was stupid. No, we leaked that we were watching the island and following ships away from it to attack them once they were out of sight of the defenses. Which was mostly true. Our hiding spot was just off the surface of the ocean. With the illusion field active, we were practically invisible. And that was the point. I wanted someone to eventually notice us and try to attack. Otherwise, I would have just used the cloak and kept mobile. Our enemies had to think I was overconfident after our attacks so far but not idiotic. So we waited and watched the ships coming and going from the port. From this angle, it was hard to see any clear marking of the ships but Kickle eventually noticed something off. "That's the 3rd time that ship has docked today, Captain." I looked at the ship he was pointing to, not that I could tell one airship apart from another if they had the same features but I took his word for it. I wonder what they are up to. They could be trying to artificially inflate their numbers by making it look like the port is busier than it should be. Making us wait while they tighten the noose or even bring in more pirates, Barkos replied. "If that's the case, then where are they?" I asked, scanning the horizon. As I was doing my search, I spotted something. It was a shadow on the surface of the water. I might have missed it if I hadn't specifically been looking for anything out of place. "Those crafty bastards," I said, "they located us and sent cloaked attack vessels to corral us in. Look, the ships at the port are on the move." Sure enough, all 4 ships docked at the port were now heading off, but not coming directly at us. They were going to try and predict our moves and cut off our retreat. I smiled at that. If my objective was to retreat, they did an admirable job, but I was here to attack and I had a new toy to test out. Tukath hissed in delight. His scout ships had located the prize hiding near the water and they seemed to be oblivious to their approach so far. Everything was in place though, and he had talked 3 other captains into joining him, promising them all rewards for the destruction of this enemy ship. Not that he would be paying anything, he would hang back and watch the destruction, then when victory was assured, he would take all of them down and take over control of this port for his own benefit. The 4 ships launched from the port. It wasn't long after that that there was movement from the target. Of course, they would suspect something was up, only a fool would think this was normal. But he let out a self-satisfied hiss as the opening salvo of the battle commenced. 20 of his fast attack craft dropped stealth and zipped toward the small vessel. Their enemy was quick to respond though, deploying their guns and eliminating 8 craft with the first volley. That was fine. They were expendable and they only needed to herd the ship long enough for the main fleet to get within weapons range. The enemy's tactics made no sense though, and Tukath hissed in confusion. They should be trying to run, but they weren't. They were heading straight for his group of vessels while fighting off the smaller craft. Tukath's first instinct was to flee. Something was wrong, but if he did that, his crew would mutiny in the face of cowardice. That didn't mean he needed to take the initial brunt of whatever was happening. "Slow our speed by 10%, let our allies act as a shield while we see what this enemy is up to," he yelled out his orders. His actions appeared to be prophetic when the enemy deployed an unknown weapon against one of the pirate vessels. A distorted ripple passed over the ship, followed by a massive burst of unrestrained mana. Whatever had happened, it had completely torn through that ship's defenses and the shield wasn't even available to block the follow-up attack. "Get us out of the firing arc of that weapon. Come up underneath and behind their ship," Tukath roared, causing his crew to fly into a flurry of movement. There was no immediate follow-up on the second or third ship, but everyone was in motion now. Each ship began firing as soon as they were within range. There was no effort given for aiming, and two more of Tukath's fast attack vessels were hit by friendly fire. Although, it was probably more deliberate than it looked. He hissed in outrage and seared that ship into his mind. He would make them suffer after they dealt with this pirate hunter. Tukath's ship rocked as the cannons were fired. The enemy ship was taking dozens of incoming rounds but seemed to be holding strong against three much larger ships. Another volley went out from his ship before the enemy's strange weapon fired yet again. This time the attack was a glancing blow, but the damage was still significant. The entire side of the vessel had a huge gaping crater in it. It shouldn't have been enough to make the vessel crash, but it fell from the air like all of its enchantments had simply stopped existing. Tukath got a sinking feeling about this strange weapon and decided he would rather be branded a coward than have to face what he thought it was doing. Instead of ordering his helmsmen to redirect their course, he simply ripped the human from his post, killing him in the process, and took his place. The enemy ship wasn't the only ship with hidden secrets. Tukath ordered the spears launched. Despite the name, these weren't weapons. As his ship angled away from the fight, 4 fast attack craft launched from the front of his ship. They were tethered to his vessel by thick ropes. As these crafts hit the end of their ropes, his ship picked up incredible speed. It wasn't enough though. The enemy ship turned its devastating weapon on his ship next and fired. The follow-up beam only tore across a portion of the upper deck, but Tukath knew that wasn't the true weapon. Almost immediately he felt the ship begin to plummet from the sky. The attached balloon wasn't enough to keep airships in the air without the additional enchantments. Even the ships pulling them along were yanked from the sky as they shared the same fate as their mother vessel. The last thing Tukath knew was hate as his ship slammed into the ocean below and broke apart on the unforgiving surface. The first shot of the null beam was an unmitigated success. That's where things went a bit off though. The energy had overloaded the control system that connected to that turret, and I had to try and reboot it manually while continuing to fire at the other ships. It only took a minute to get it up and running again, but a minute in a battle like this seemed like an eternity. The second shot only managed a glancing blow to the pirate ship, but watching it fall from the sky told me everything I needed to know. The one ship that was hanging back a bit and trying to flank us decided to try and run at this point. I couldn't have that, so I quickly reoriented the cannon and fired. The angle was bad, so the beam almost completely missed, but it had a similar fate as the second ship. That was Tukath's ship, Kickle pointed out as he avoided most of the last ship's broadside. Our shields were barely holding, and that was only thanks to some bleed over from my new weapon going into the mana heart. While that might seem like a good thing to have, I would have to fix it. It's what caused the system to overload in the first place. We only got lucky that it didn't crack the entire crystal. So now I could only fire the weapon when our reserves were low. Not an ideal situation to have, but I was glad we learned about it now instead of when we were up against more ships. Not that fighting 4 ships and a score of other smaller vessels was easy, but it was within expectations. The last ship fought to the bitter end, sending as many fighters as they could to try and board our ship. With nothing to stop me from targeting them though, only a quarter of the pirates managed to touch down on the deck. I didn't bother sending barcos up there to deal with them. Instead, I just activated the electrical defense, then had Kickle flip the ship, dumping any survivors into the ocean below. Seeing how effective the new main weapon was, I decided we were going to take this pirate port. It may take some time, but I think it was doable. Less than a minute later the final enemy ship succumbed to a withering barrage from the Retribution's weapons. The main cannon was offline again due to my activation of the defensive systems, causing it to discharge prematurely. I probably should have tested it more thoroughly, but still, I wasn't swapping it back out. It was a game changer, even if it did have some faults. With the ships defeated, the remaining pirates on the island could only watch in impotent rage as we recovered the flags, killed off any surviving pirates in the wreckage, and looted anything that hadn't sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Some weren't content to watch this happen and teleport or flew down to try and kill us. I don't know what they expected, but the ones that teleport or had weird transport abilities found themselves falling through the sky and into the ocean below. The flyers fared a bit better, but Kickle was having a field day picking them off with the monolasers. Only a few of the more intelligent ones managed to get aboard. Barcos hung back while Emma and I dealt with them. While they may have been smarter than the rest, they weren't exactly the A-team as far as pirates go. I didn't even have to use any skills to deal with the few that made it. Some of the pirates that stayed on the island were trying to fire the cannons at us. While they could reach, we were on the far end of their range. So accuracy was not very high and the few that made it usually exploded before reaching us or impacted the shield with little to no damage. The retribution didn't come out of the fight unharmed. One barrage had broken through the shields at one point and the armor had taken a beating in that area. This along with the damage sustained in our attempt to flee from the shipyard meant some serious downtime for repairs. It's another reason why I decided I wanted this island. What better place than a fully stocked pirate island to perform repairs at? Of course, I would have to evict the current tenants but that wasn't much of a concern. We finished looting the dead and went back inside the ship to start the next portion of my plan. Chapter 207, Island Paradise. We circled the island as the defenders took pot shots at the retribution. Few of them hit and the volume of fire wasn't enough to worry the shields. Why do you want this island? Emma asked for the second time. Because we need a place to stage our raids from. Preferably away from prying eyes, I replied. I don't see how you are going to hold it with the 4 of us, she mumbled in return. True, holding it with only 4 people would be impossible. But I didn't plan on sticking anyone here to hold it. I would simply set up active defenses that would ambush anyone that stepped foot on the island. Heck, it might even make a nice trap for pirates. Given more time and resources I could add automated cannons to defend it better but I didn't know if I wanted to spend that much time or resources while I was in this area. It was bad enough I was going to have to burn through some of my spare parts to fix up the damage the ship incurred thus far. We have to take the island first, Barcos snorted in reply, sounding like he didn't think that was a likely outcome. In most cases, he might be correct but with the null beam, I could target sections of the island to disable cannons. It wouldn't be as effective as it was on the ships because they could just repower the cannons but if I could slip Barcos on the island while we did it, it would make the effort of clearing the island much faster. Of course, I told him my plan and he scoffed at the audacity of it, though he didn't say no. I think he secretly liked the daring approach and was looking forward to a fight. All right, you two get ready. We are going to hit this stretch up ahead. We will continue pounding the defenses while you two disrupt them from the inside. Try not to get killed, I added. Barcos grunted, tossing back a bottle of liquor before he gave a nonchalant wave as he exited toward the deck. Emma just mumbled, why did I agree to this lunacy again? Oh yeah, because someone in my government wanted me dead. I ignored their antics as I focused on the task at hand. With the null beam being so finicky I needed to watch it carefully and cut off the power system to prevent feedback. We're in position, Barcos said over the speaker. I nodded to Kickle and he jerked the ship to the right and accelerated toward a pair of turrets that had just fired upon us. One of the cannonballs struck the shield, causing the ship to buck but we stayed on course. I knew about how long it would take for the guns to reload so I waited even though we were already within range. I fired 5 seconds before they should have been ready. It seemed one of the enemy crews decided to be a bit quicker about reloading this time around. The shot missed our ship though as I fired the beam. As soon as I pressed the trigger, I issued the order to Barcos and Emma. Go! The ripple of draining energy swept past the 2 cannon emplacements, causing the second one to go dark. It seems it wasn't able to disrupt the active cannonball in the other emplacement as the fortified position erupted in a fire as the ammunition exploded in the barrel. I would have cheered had it been the return beam, but it wasn't aimed at either of those positions. It swept past and collided with a third cannon further back and up a rocky hill, obliterating it with prejudice. None of these cannons were protected by shields. The cost would have been exorbitant. This is why I think we had a good chance of actually pulling this off. The ship pitched sharply down as our attack landed and we skirted the underside of the island at high speed. We didn't have time to see if Emma or Barcos managed to get ashore but I had faith that they would be fine. All right, let's start harassing more emplacements, I said to Kickle. It took a few hours but we started to see evidence that Barcos and Emma had been hard at work. Some cannons simply didn't fire as we passed them, meaning they had nobody to crew them or the crew had been taken out. Some small fires were spreading in the town as well and a few pirates tried to flee in smaller ships that had been hidden on the island. We ruthlessly cut these ships down as we found them. Since they were not much more than dinghies they had no defense or offensive capabilities. After 2 hours of not getting shot at we carefully approached the small town. There was a white flag waving above the largest building. I spotted 2 people standing at the end of a dock cut into the island instead of the normal style that jutted out. I guess it made sense, it was much cheaper to just carve an earthen trench than it was to employ whatever enchantments made the weird wooden docks float in the air. The 2 people were, of course, Barcos and Emma in her standard middle-aged woman persona. I noticed they weren't the only people alive though, as I saw tentative glances from shuttered windows and dark alleys. Fuck, I cursed quietly, realizing these were probably slaves. Kickle set the retribution down in the dock, but I told him to keep the systems up and his eyes out for any surprises. I wondered if he resented being stuck on the ship so often. He never said anything about it, but it must be annoying seeing as he never got much experience. It was probably why it took him so long to hit level 20. I did notice he finally chose his second class and managed to level it, although it seemed like a strange choice to me. It made a sort of sense given his history. Kickle Elemental Blade / Justicar 27ths. Considering the system gave reduced experience for fighting like this, Kickle had made significant progress on his second class. This only applied to people killed with the ship weapons though. Everyone else got significantly reduced experience for the other deaths we caused. I guess the system had to balance it somehow, otherwise, people like pirates would massively outlevel anyone else without much in the way of danger to themselves. It also explained why the enemy captains almost always seemed to join the melee fighting instead of remaining aboard their ships. I wondered if that was one of the benchmarks that the system went by, actual danger to your person during a fight. It would make sense given what I have experienced thus far. It was probably the reason Barcos was still stuck at level 19 of his second class, that or he wanted to keep pushing his main class, but that seemed counterproductive considering he could get 5 more stat points with so much less effort. Maybe I would ask him about it when we had some time. I jumped off the ship and landed on the dock next to Barcos. Very dramatic, Captain, Barcos replied, slowly clapping as he smirked at me. Fuck off, I replied, just tell me how it went. Honestly, rather boring. None of the remaining pirates even put up a fight, Barcos sighed. Ma grunted, easy for you to say, I almost lost my head to one prick that was hiding in the town hall. Most of the pirates are dead, a few had bolt holes on the island that they managed to slip into during the chaos. We managed to locate a few of them thanks to the help of the slaves, but there are others we have yet to find. I huffed in annoyance, knowing it was not going to be easy to flush these remaining pirates out, but I would deal with that later. What about the slaves? I asked instead. Domestic slaves mostly, that or sex slaves. All of the fighting ones went down with the ships, and some of the slaves aren't too happy with you about that. They probably had loved ones aboard, Ma replied. Of course they did. Are we going to have any problems with them? We might have, but after they saw Barcos dismember a pirate, the most vocal ones decided to shut up. There are still those that are demanding we return them to their families, but they aren't inciting anything yet. Probably due to fear that we might punish them. I rubbed my chin in thought. Find the leaders and bring them to the town hall, tell them I have a proposition for them. After some time, Ma was finally able to convince, or more like order the leaders of the remaining slaves to come to speak with me. Thank you all for coming, I started, only to be rudely interrupted by one of the men. Like we had much of a choice, he glared at Ma, who ignored the man's piercing stare. Well, can be a bit rough around the edges, but unless she physically beat you to get you to come, I expect you to shut up and listen to what I have to offer. The man looked like he wanted to call me out on my threat but eventually backed down. I think it had to do with the firm grip that a few of the other slaves had on him. Good, now I have an offer to make for you. Before they could ask, I held up my hand to stop any questions. I can't offer you passage off this island, at least not yet. What I can offer you is autonomy and freedom from those collars. What I need in return is for you and the rest of the slaves to keep the island safe from other pirates until transportation can be arranged. I waited, fully expecting to be interrupted, but nobody spoke, so I continued. I can offer you weapons to better defend the island, and I can contract a supply ship to come here and restock essentials. If you want off at that point, you will have to discuss that with any merchant that comes along. For those who stay and anyone that manages to take down a pirate, they will get 80% of any loot and applicable reward if they can prove they killed the pirate. This includes any pirates currently hiding on the island. This got the group talking amongst themselves. Some seemed ecstatic at the idea, others not so much. Finally, one turned to me and asked the question I had been waiting for. How do we know you can get these collars off? I waved him forward, which he hesitantly accepted. Now I had long ago added an invisible tattoo to a few places on my body that could easily reach my neck, just in the off chance that I got collared again. It was much more elegant than the ham-fisted solutions I had come up with in the past. I reached up and ran my finger against the man's collar. There was a click and the collar broke in half and clattered to the floor, to the astonishment of almost everyone in the room. It was only ruined by Barcos's yawning. Needless to say, the group quickly agreed to my offer. I handed them a tattooed piece of leather and showed them how to use it. The tattoo was just a random design that was meant to look vaguely enchantment-like. The real runes were hidden as usual. Soon every slave collar was removed and the remains were cast into the ocean below to prevent them from ever being used on another intelligent person again. Now, while these people weren't fighters, that didn't mean they didn't have a fighting spirit. In fact, 3 pirate hideouts were quickly torn open and the pirates in question were beaten into unconsciousness and dragged to a gallows that some of the other slaves quickly erected. Ah, the joy of skills making construction fast and easy. I had to admit these former slaves had a bit of a sadistic streak. They clapped the surviving pirates in anti-magic cuffs, waited for them to come to, then they hanged them. System-given stats did not make hanging a person a very good way to die. No, these pirates clung to life for minutes while the former slaves quietly watched with not so much as a hint of remorse or pity in their eyes. I knew the feeling, I hadn't been much different so long ago. If the former slaves thought a pirate was taking too long to die, they simply took turns stabbing them with a long-handled spear. The wounds were shallow and timidly made but they eventually got the desired result. Next came the burials. Over a dozen former slaves died in the attempt to capture the pirates that they did capture. These were given funeral rites and sent into the ocean below. The next week was a blur of activity. I made Emma, Barcos, and Kickle join in with the slave hunting parties to root out pirates. If I left it up to the former slaves, they would just keep getting killed, making my efforts useless. While they were gone, I was able to recruit the help of a metalsmith and some workers to make repairs to the Retribution. The only sticky point was when one begged me to take him on as crew and another tried to hide aboard the ship. I simply turned down the beggar and paid him for his work. As for the stowaway, I was none too pleased by that but I simply knocked him unconscious and tossed him back on the island. That got me a few angry looks but everyone knew what I had done for them so a few passing people grabbed the unconscious man and carried him off. Hopefully, the storage ring I left him with, and the sizable amount of credits it contained would cool his temper. The ship was fixed, the issues with the null beam mitigated and even the hunting teams had managed to root out 7 more pirate hidey holes, this time with no loss of life thanks to my crew being involved. All in all, things were coming together quite nicely. I didn't have a whole lot of material to add traps to the town but I had enough to make assaulting the small village on foot a nightmare. I left the training of the cannons to the other 3 since those were still going to be the best defense the island had against other pirates. I doubted it would be long before another pirate showed up. This base may be out of the way but it was also the only known pirate base within days of this location and quite a few used it to make repairs after raids, at least according to the locals. Thankfully the survivors were set for some time. The island was fully stocked less than 2 weeks ago and for a much larger force than what was now on the island. With the reduced need and the fact that everything was in storage items, it would last until it ran out which was around 6 months. That was more than enough time for me to procure the services of at least 1 merchant vessel. Heck, I might not even need to do that if the locals played their cards right. They could easily sucker a pirate ship into the dock, then just wait for the pirates to get shit-faced drunk, and kill them all. Then take the ship and leave on their own terms. It would mean the island was undefended but it would save me the hassle of getting all of the former slaves off the island by myself. I did bring this idea up to the leaders but they deemed it an unnecessary risk as they were not trained fighters. I just shrugged and the 4 of us set off to cash in the bounties and see if we could find any details on our main target. Chapter 208, Intentions. After fixing the Retribution and rounding up most of the hidden pirates, my small group set sail again. Everyone was in good spirits after our little battle, even Barcos. Mostly because there was enough booze on the island to make even him happy. The first island we stopped at had no merchants willing to brave the trip, even with our insurance that we would be protecting them. It wasn't much of a surprise to me that they refused. I would have refused in their place as well. It wasn't like they knew who we were, for all they knew we could be leading them into a trap. Knowing this was the case, our next 3 stops didn't go any better. It wasn't until we made it to the 4th island that a man approached us as we drowned our repeated failures in the local bar. "Are you, Captain Paul, of the Retribution?" the unassuming man asked. I surveyed the bar but nobody else seemed to be paying attention. So it seemed this man came alone. That was odd. Not odd that he approached us, we had been approached by pirates masquerading as merchants on more than one occasion so far. But Kickle and Emma were always able to sniff them out beforehand. "I might be, who's asking?" The man gave a stiff nod and produced a sealed envelope from his storage ring. "If you have time, my boss would like to discuss a possible business arrangement with you." I didn't take the offered envelope. I stared at the man, making him nervous. And who is this boss of yours? The man swallowed. That would be Director Tolish, Captain. Kickle spit when he heard the name, and I even heard an amused snort from Barkos, which was impressive considering he hadn't stopped guzzling a bottle the entire time this man was standing here. Seeing as I wasn't going to take the envelope from his hand, the man set it on the table, bowed one last time, and briskly walked back out of the bar. So, who is this director? I asked, using the edge of my cup to pull the envelope toward me. He is the director of all of the guild forces within the Isles, Kickle replied with venom. He isn't such a bad man, Emma replied, there are certainly worse people the guild could have sent to our islands. Bah, of course, you would side with them. Considering the Avwillian Protectorate was the first county to benefit from their unfair practices, Kickle replied, slamming his cup down and spilling some of his drink. Emma just rolled her eyes, which for an Elixian meant, she could manipulate them to do whatever she wanted. It was unsettling to watch her eyes spin like a wheel from a slot machine before they came to a stop. She gave me a coy wink. I shuddered, taking a big gulp of my drink to cover my revulsion. Barkos let out a loud burp as he set his empty bottle down. Emma is right, besides, I think you enjoyed being a pirate more than you ever did running supplies. Kickle grumbled but didn't acknowledge the truth. So you think it's safe to accept this invitation? Barkos shrugged, safe probably shouldn't be used here, but I doubt the man will outright attack you. He obviously wants something and is willing to deal with you without resorting to violence. Emma, could you do some digging and see what comes up? She gave an exaggerated sigh before standing up, and here I thought I would get a day of rest. Give me a few days and I'll meet you three back at the ship. With that, she turned and left the bar. I took the knife from my empty plate and used it to slice the seal on the envelope open. I ignored the look Barkos gave me for being overly paranoid, but I didn't trust the guild. It turned out the letter was just a simple letter. Greetings, Mr. Paul Fuller, or should I say Captain Fuller, congratulations by the way. I am Director Tolish of the Merchant House of the Guild. I am aware of your recent run-in with a Lord Victi. I can assure you I don't share the man's goals. But I don't expect you to believe me. But that is fine. I have removed any guild agents that were in the Isles searching for you as an offer of peace. The lovely Emma should be able to corroborate this. As for why I reached out to you, I believe we could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. I will also eliminate the threat that Lord Victi poses to your friends, although, I hear they are doing quite well against his forces, so it may not even be necessary. If you would like to meet and discuss this opportunity, please come to Mohissa Island at your earliest opportunity. Regards, Director Tolish. I didn't know what to make of this invitation. Was this infighting amongst the guild? It seemed that way. But he also called his allegiance a house, so perhaps the guild wasn't as cohesive as I first thought. It actually made more sense that they were made up of smaller groups, seeing as they spanned entire worlds. Where is Mohissa? I asked while debating on whether I wanted to go or not. I heard Kickle grumble, it's only a few days away, actually closer to the island we liberated than this one. I would ask why we didn't stop there, but I already knew the answer to that. Kickle hated the guild as much as I did. But where his hate was justified, it seemed like mine might be a bit misplaced. Emma returned after her quick investigation and verified everything that the letter contained. That made my decision easy and we set sail for Mohissa. I was expecting some massive island, covered in over-the-top displays of wealth and power. Instead, we arrived at a rather small island with a port that covered the entire thing. There were mostly guild airships coming and going, but I could see a number of other ships docked. It was a plain as day trading hub, and while there wasn't a bazaar here, there was a massive market. Everything looked clean and well maintained, but nothing was ostentatious. The streets were wide and straight to make transferring massive amounts of goods from one side of the island to the other a quick process. Not everybody could afford thousands of storage rings or either didn't want the expense. We docked, and after handing our invitation to the dock master, we were quickly greeted with a carriage that took us to the central office, as the man called it. If anything, the central office was even busier than the dock. It was a 3-story building with 2 wings off a central tower. It wasn't built to be the jewel of some empire, its brick siding and decorations very modest. 2 flags hung over the main entrance, one was the guild's and the other one I didn't recognize but could assume meant it stood for the merchant house. We were ushered inside by an attendant and almost immediately seen by this director fellow. None of that bullshit waiting to make him seem more important than he was. I had expected another haughty overbearing noble type like Lord Victi, so I was surprised to see a tall smiling beastman with twin horns that curled back from his forehead and along his skull coming to an end behind his ears. Other than the horns, the man had no other features singling him out as a beastman. I accepted the offered hand from the smiling man without much thought, my mind still trying to figure out what was happening here. It wasn't magic, I had prepared by wearing my ring. Was this man just genuinely friendly? Good to finally meet you. You prefer to be called Paul, yes? Or would you prefer Captain Paul? Paul is fine, I managed to stammer out, earning a chuckle from my shadows, Kickle, Barkos, and Emma. You can call me Tolish, I see you brought your crew. Welcome, welcome. Emma, it has been too long, the man said, kissing her hand and making the Elixian woman blush. I really would love to hear the story behind that, but perhaps another time. Ahem, I said, clearing my throat. Apologies, Paul, I sometimes get distracted by beautiful women, he replied with a wink before walking back behind his desk and motioning for us to take seats. I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I understand your dealings with the guild haven't been exactly cordial so far. That was a bit of an understatement, unless open war was a normal occurrence for the guild. Then again, considering the size of the organization, it probably was. The actions of this Lord Victi aren't representative of the guild as a whole. As you can imagine, an organization of our size has many differing opinions within. We try to have an open mind, but some factions see things a certain way and are unwilling to compromise. Or they see themselves as better than others. And how are you different? My anger stirring after he brought up Lord Victi's name. I am part of the merchant house, one of many within the guild. Although we are currently the largest, it gives us a bit of leverage against certain forces, and we try to remain as neutral as we can. Which is why I invited you here today. I have heard about your fascinating new enchantments. So he wanted my runic plans and knowledge. Same shit, different package, and I decided to call him out on it. How is that any different than what Lord Victi wants? I think you misunderstand, Paul. Lord Victi wanted to capture you and your process for his own greed. I simply want to sell your items. I paused at that and had to think. What was his angle? Surely working with me would earn the ire of more than Lord Victi and whatever faction he worked for. I had to know. Why? Director Tolish leaned back in his chair and steepled his hands below his chin. A simple yet weighty question. Let me give you a bit of information first. The guild is a fractious lot, where certain technologies are held by powerful houses. They use their monopolies to control the market and drive up prices. While I'm not against the high prices as it benefits my house, this practice tends to stagnate development. Take airships for example. The Shipbuilders Alliance within the guild controls all of the plans for every conceivable way to make a ship fly. Except yours and any possible homegrown alternatives that may have cropped up on your planet. How they haven't learned about your ship yet is beyond me, or maybe they have and are already moving in the shadows to deal with you. I can't be sure. I shifted uncomfortably at this news. But what about the new ships the Avwillian are developing? That got a tisk of disapproval from Barkos, but I ignored him. I didn't owe the Avwillian Protectorate any allegiance. Tolish chuckled. There is no reason to be concerned about that. The shipbuilders are behind their improvements. The design is not something revolutionary. It just isn't used because the cost and mana requirements are hard to justify. Okay, so even if I did agree to sell to you, what's to stop someone like the shipbuilders from coming after me? It seems like a no-brainer. If I was in their position, take out the competition. Tolish nodded. You would be correct. If you aren't part of the guild, there would be nothing to stop the shipbuilders from taking your design or the dwarves from skinning you alive to find out where you stole their weapon designs from. You aren't making a good case if you want me to sell to you. But then again, you said if I wasn't part of the guild. You want me to join the guild, don't you? The man smiled broadly. Good, I was hoping you would catch that. Yes, if you joined the guild, you would earn certain protections. Your technology would be safe from theft by the other factions. I could step in and remove this Lord Victi as an issue, and while you wouldn't be safe from hired assassins, you would be safe from outright attack by the other houses. Something you would not be able to weather on your own, even with your impressive tech. Trust me, Lord Victi is a minnow in a sea full of killers. I didn't know what to say about this offer. It sounded too good to be true. What do you get out of this? You give me exclusive rights to sell your technology for 10 years. I make a fortune, you get safety for your people, it's a win-win. I need time to think about this, I replied. That's to be expected. But don't take too much time. I have already had to kill more than a dozen guild agents that were looking for you and your ship. They won't stop until they have what they want, and I expect their next steps will not be very pleasant. While I can hold off a few spies, I cannot stop a determined assault force without a very good reason. As we all stood, I shook the man's hand one last time before I left the office to think on his proposal. Sure, it sounded good, but what strings came attached to joining the guild? I knew I couldn't keep rune crafting a secret forever. I knew the Stygian Order was already experimenting with their own style, and some of my employees had picked up things from watching me. The smart thing to do would be to jump at this chance and ruthlessly squash anyone from experimenting with runecraft. But did I want to do that? Earth needed a way to even the odds, and rune crafting gave it a unique advantage. Sure, it wasn't as powerful as enchantments, but it seemed to be more versatile. Combining the two together would be ideal, but I suspected finding someone to train you to enchant would be a difficult prospect considering the guild's heavy-handed ways. Even then it would be of little value because you would only learn that subset of enchanting. From what little experience I had with enchanted items, I could tell it was a rigid art form, full of esoteric rules and design constraints to get the desired results. Otherwise, there would be no monopolies, someone would simply copy the design and recreate it on their own. Rune crafting had its own issue in that department, being more intent-based. A dozen people could use the same runes in the same pattern and come up with 12 different outcomes if they all had a different understanding of the runes involved. This could be fixed by giving them a set of runes and telling them you wanted a certain effect as the outcome. The design and order might change, but the end result would be much closer. I only realized this fact after looking over the items left behind by the Stygian Order and trying to reproduce them. The results were anything but similar. It was fascinating and disturbing at the same time. But this is what made rune crafting so versatile. Hell, given enough time I could create a set of wholly unique runes. All it required was a belief that the random squiggles had meaning. The system would do the rest. I decided to put these thoughts aside while we found a willing merchant and headed back to the unnamed island full of freed prisoners. Chapter 209, Industrious. It was less than 2 weeks since we had left the island to its own devices. So I was a bit surprised to see 2 pirate ships docked at the port. Careful of a trap, I dropped Barcos and Emma off to scout things before we docked. Thankfully the merchant ship was a guild ship, and even if these were pirates, they weren't dumb enough to attack a guild vessel. It didn't take long for Barcos to send up an all-clear signal. With a weary shrug, I ordered Kickle to take us in. It was soon apparent why Barcos signaled it clear. All along the dock were the corpses of pirates, hanging from poles every 5 feet. The populace was hurrying about, unloading spoils from the ships. One of the self-appointed freed leaders was waiting by the dock with Barcos and Emma. The man nodded curtly and motioned for us to follow. Without waiting for a reply, he headed off at a quick pace toward the meeting hall. With nothing to do but follow, I fell in next to Emma. "What the hell happened here?" I whispered. She shrugged in response. "My guess is they killed the pirate crews. I assume we will learn more at this meeting." We were led into the same room we interviewed the slaves the last time we were here. This time we were on the other end as 5 people were seated behind a long table. Their talking ceased as we entered and the group stood and bowed to us. Confusion clearly on my face, I bowed slightly in return. One of the men, the distrustful one as I recall, spoke first. "I seem to have lost a significant amount of credits. I bet that you would not return and that your words had all been a lie. You're kind of an ass, aren't you?" I said I would return, and so I have. I prefer to think of myself as pragmatic. Would you trust you, in my position? I didn't have to think long. No, probably not. The man smiled knowingly. "Well, I am happy to see I was mistaken. As you could see from outside, we took steps to ensure even if you didn't return, that we could survive or flee if needed." "Yet, how did you manage to deal with the crews?" The 5 chuckled darkly and one of the women responded. "We simply fooled the idiots. We made it seem like we were pirates left behind, then when they drank themselves into a stupor, we struck. We killed many in their sleep, the rest we strung up. A few of us died, but the cost was worth it to watch the life drain from their stupid faces as they choked out their last breaths. Note to self, stay the fuck away from this crazy bitch." "Impressive. So what now?" Barcos interrupted with a bored expression on his face, like this was a normal day for him. "Now we have choices," a third member spoke up. "We have 2 well-armed ships and a guild merchant vessel willing to bring supplies. What we lack is people. There was a pause as muttering and whispered talk broke out amongst the five. They seemed to come to some consensus as they turned and the first man spoke again. We would like to free more slaves, with your assistance. I couldn't help it, I groaned and Kickle chuckled quietly behind me because he knew I didn't want to start a slave uprising, but here it was in its infancy. It wasn't like I could even stop them at this point, that would likely get me swinging from a rope along with the pirates. Fuck my life. It turns out the former slaves I met with weren't completely forthcoming in what they told me. I learned from Emma that there was a third pirate ship that the slaves had freed. All of the freed pirate slaves were used to man that one ship and given the runic devices I had doled out to go from port to port, freeing other slaves. The more I heard, the more I got a headache. Why did they even need my assistance if they already decided on a course of action? I certainly wasn't willing to put my life at risk to attack ships and free slaves that way. Case in point, when the guild merchant ship arrived, some fucking idiot decided they shouldn't have slaves either and freed a few of their crew. Only to have one of those freed people turn on his savior and choke the life out of him before anyone could intervene. The murderer fled before anyone could stop him, not that he had anywhere to go. Emma was quickly able to find this released criminal and subdue him. That wasn't the issue though. Now I was a mediator between a pissed-off captain and a bunch of freed slaves and neither side was willing to back down. You had no right to release those criminals from slavery, the aggrieved captain screamed, hand on his sword and ready to pull it out in an instant. Why they picked the loudmouth as the former slave's representative was beyond me, but here he was spitting on the floor at the captain's feet and glaring at him, daring him to respond. If they are criminals, kill them. No man, woman, or child deserves to be a slave. And who are you to make proclamations to me? You are not a representative of the guild, you are not even a member of the local governments, you are nothing. Cutting you down would be a mercy to the world. I was forced to grab the captain's arm as he went to pull his sword out. It was easy enough to stop him, the man was a merchant, not a fighter. Let's all take a few deep breaths and relax. I had to ask myself why I even bothered stopping the man. Oh right, because getting a guild representative killed when I was thinking about accepting a deal with them would probably be seen in a bad light. The guild captain relented, allowing his sword to slide back into his scabbard while the former slave representative smirked in unfounded victory. I decided to figuratively slap the smirk off the man's face, although literally smacking it off would have brought me more joy. As for you, how dumb can you possibly be? Do you know what I had to go through to get a merchant to come here? No, of course you don't, because you are short-sighted and pig-headed. I don't like slavery any more than you, but I know when to not poke a bear. It's admirable that you want to see all slaves released, but maybe you should ask yourself why they are slaves in the first place? Or don't you care that one of your people died while the man he freed is now hanging from a post? I punctuated my statement by pointing to the man in question. For the first time, I saw the cocky idiot actually think about the actions of his people instead of just going with the mob mindset. Unfortunately, it didn't last long before an angry sneer replaced his thoughtful look. If you aren't here to help us, then you should just leave and take your guild lapdog with you. We can free slaves on our own. I wanted to laugh in the man's face. I had handed out maybe a dozen of the runic items to speed the process of freeing slaves on the island. But these were not items designed to last. I couldn't imagine them freeing more than a few thousand slaves before the items stopped working. By then the man would either come begging me for more or attempt to force me to make more. They certainly had the numbers to do so, not that I or my crew would make it easy on them. I decided on a third course. I would offer them more but add in certain stipulations for my assistance. I still needed this island as a base of operations, so making nice with the locals was required, despite my distaste. Captain, if you will excuse us, I need to have a word with the island's representative alone. Grudgingly the captain nodded and left the room. I sighed as I turned back around to face the irate former slave. I turned off my fake smile and glared at the man, causing him to flinch back and grip the broken table leg he used for a club. While fearful of what I might do, he wasn't spineless. Good, I could work with that. I agreed to help you, people, because I needed your help in return. Your actions today have put all of that in jeopardy, I said as I paced slowly around him, hands clasped behind my back, my eyes never leaving the man. Yet not a month later and your ideas have grown beyond your means. You even went so far as to assault a guild ship. A monumental height of stupidity that even I wouldn't entertain. Well, technically not true, I had attacked the guild multiple times, but he didn't need to know that. And for what? Your people freed 4 people before getting caught, and of those 4, only one wasn't tossed off the island, and that's only because your people caught him and hung him. If you want me to keep assisting you with these lofty goals of freeing slaves, you need to be smarter about it. Seeing as I still had his attention, I continued, no more of this attacking ships nonsense. Do you know how many slaves aboard a pirate ship weren't former pirates or murderers? I waited for his response. He slowly shook his head. Well, neither do I, but I know someone who does, and they have informed me that most if not all are former criminals or pirates. So let me ask you, this ship you sent on its merry way, did you put any trusted people aboard it for your cause? Hesitantly he nodded. I shook my head at the stupidity. Well, you might as well mourn their deaths. I can almost guarantee the freed pirates killed those people and took the ship as their own. I let my words sink into this man's thick skull, watching as his face fell as the realization of what they had done dawned on him. I will take my ship and track this vessel if we can, to verify my words. But I have little doubt about what I will find. I stopped in front of the man as his former gruff demeanor melted away to reveal a defeated man with sagging shoulders. I decided to add the carrot now since the stick was broken. You are now a leader and people trust you to do what's best for everyone. Sometimes that means not doing something despite what you wished you could do. I approve of your goal. I find slavery to be the most reprehensible thing anyone could do to anyone else. But I am only one person and the multiverse is enormous. Start small. Maybe one day your efforts will bear fruit and slavery will no longer exist. Seeing as my words finally got through to the man, I handed him another dozen rune tokens. These things don't last forever. Use them wisely because I won't always be around to make more. You may eventually have to purchase them yourself, from the guild. Seeing understanding in his eyes, he nodded, accepting the items and shuffling out a back door to the building. I heard soft clapping from behind me, and when I turned I spotted Barcos leaning against the wall with one foot pressed up against it. Wonderful speech, Captain, I almost believed it myself, the man said with an infuriating grin on his face. Shut the fuck up. Go get the others, we got a rogue ship to track down. With a jaunty salute, the man pushed himself off the wall and vanished. I sighed internally. It wasn't complete bullshit that I spouted to the former slave, but I doubted his rebellion would go anywhere. I just needed these people to survive long enough for me to make use of this island before they pissed off so many people that the local governments were forced to step in and deal with them. Did this make me a horrible person? I guess arguably I was already a horrible person. I mean, I wantonly slaughtered people for nothing more than slighting me. What was one more lie on top of hundreds of deaths? Chapter 210, The Spark. After a week of following the faint trail of the ship that left the pirate haven, we finally caught up with it. Or at least where it stopped. It was another pirate city, but it appeared a massive battle had taken place. Buildings were nothing more than burned out husks and bodies were strewn about everywhere. It was rather easy to tell what had happened as the remains of broken slave collars were lying about everywhere. The exception to this was the non-combatant slaves. It seems the former pirate slaves didn't look too kindly on them. Using them as practice dummies, taking turns defiling their bodies, or simply hacking them to pieces while leaving their collars intact, making it impossible for them to fight back. I just shook my head at the wanton slaughter that occurred here. Nobody was going to miss the dead pirates, but I doubted this was the sort of revolution the optimistic freed slaves had in mind. Seeing as there was nothing left worth taking as the former pirate slaves had ransacked anything of value, we left the island and began trying to track them again. It was much easier since we were now tracking 3 ships instead of the one. Left to fester and grow, this new menace would not stop at attacking pirate hideouts. It took another 3 days to catch up, and by that time the 3 ships had grown to 5. Where the other 2 ships had come from, I wasn't sure. But it was more than I was comfortable taking on. If they were smaller ships I wouldn't hesitate, but each one was a large warship, with the smallest being the original ship from the liberated island. What do ya wanna do, Captain? Kickle asked. What are our odds? 50-50. Probably less. If these were still slave-run ships I would give us better odds, but now these men have a reason to fight and they won't go down easy. I nodded, knowing his evaluation was probably pretty accurate. Although I would give us a bit better odds, they still weren't great. All it would take is one of the enemy ships ramming us and even the Retribution's tough shield would collapse under the strain. We need to warn the Protectorate and the Federation about this new threat. Perhaps they will take it seriously enough to send a fleet out to deal with it. Kickle nodded, turning the ship away from our pursuit and toward a civilized port that may be able to help. Channy was sporting a wide cruel grin on his face as he peeled a section of skin from one of the captains of the new captured pirate ships, with a short curved blade that was rather dull. A sharp blade would have made the work quicker and easier, but he wanted his target to suffer. Suffer like how he had suffered for years under multiple pirate captains. His work earned him the nickname the Executioner from his new crew. He chuckled, he liked the name. He had never earned a nickname as a faceless killer when he lived on the Isle of Gorsh. A time he still looked back on with fondness. It had been quite easy to get them to come alongside using the pirates' own tricks against them. A combination of flags meant you wished to trade. Sure, the pirates were reasonably skeptical, as all men of their nature were, but he quickly slipped a few of his men among their enslaved crew and began releasing them. After that, it was easy to subdue the few remaining pirates, using them as test subjects for his ministrations. The surviving pirates were shackled so couldn't fight back, but still, each death was more than enough to grant him a level from these stronger pirates. He had gone from level 14 to level 18 in a matter of days. And the captain here was his final masterpiece, and he was savoring every last moment before taking the man's life and hopefully bumping himself up to level 19. Who would have thought that Channy, a street urchin turned killer, would end up as a pirate captain with a fleet of 5 ships? His luck had turned when those idiots on that island freed him and strung his former captain up. Oh, how he wanted to stay amongst the sheep and slaughter to his heart's content, but this was so much better. Those people had been weak, and the thrill of hunting them down and killing them out of sight couldn't compare to having a rapt and enduring audience as he had now. The thought sent a shiver of excitement down his spine, and his loins throbbed in excitement. He would sate himself with the last surviving member of that stupid island. She wasn't much to look at, but a wormhole was a wormhole. Already his fleet of ships was heading to their next target. The anticipation of more bodies to express his talents on was palpable. With one last flourish, he detached the former captain's lower jaw, eliciting a burble of pain. With his arm he reached down the gagging man's throat and gave a mighty tug, yanking organs out through the man's mouth. Channy basked in the glow of admiration as his victim shook and shuddered, slow to die thanks to the healing potion Channy used on him. But potions had their limitations, and eventually, the man's body would give in and the final shudder would bring Channy to near ecstasy. We stopped at the first port we found and reported what we had uncovered to the dockmaster, who seemed less than interested in pirates killing other pirates. The laissez-faire attitude of the dockmaster irked me. Did he not care at all? I guess not. Not even Barcos could cajole the man into taking our account seriously, not that he tried all that hard. It didn't help that the dockmaster was well aware of who we were and the fact that Barcos was persona non grata and just short of having a bounty on his head for his actions at the Legion shipyard. Somehow the rest of us skated by, but it probably meant we wouldn't be receiving any assistance from the local government. I doubt we will find a sympathetic ear, Barcos shrugged after the dockmaster wandered off. You would have been better off keeping those men and women as slaves. I glared at the man as he gave an unrepentant shrug and headed back to the ship. I was mad, but it wasn't directed towards him, at least not all of it. It was my stupid fault we were in this mess. But with my past, I just couldn't do that. Killing them, sure, that I could do, but using them as slaves, no. I had to draw the line somewhere, even if it was just a hair above rock bottom. Any suggestions? I asked the other two. I have one, but you're probably not going to like it, Emma replied. I motioned for her to continue. If we leak that a new pirate group is trying to displace one of the kings, they should step in and deal with the problem themselves. It will mean more pirate activity in the area, but the issue of our feral former pirate slaves should be dealt with quickly. And if it isn't, then let them rape and pillage until someone in the government gets off their ass and deals with it themselves. Emma is right, Captain, while you may have set the spark, you didn't add tinder to this wildfire. It may actually work in our favor. I quirked an eyebrow at Kickle's response. How so? Well, Captain Grulane has obviously gone into hiding, otherwise we would have heard of attacks by him, even this far from his hunting grounds. If the entire province is thrown into upheaval, he may just risk surfacing to take advantage of the situation to line his own pockets some more. We only need to be ready for when he does. With Kickle's quiet demeanor, I sometimes forgot he was a crafty former pirate captain. His reasoning was sound. And while I found it distasteful to allow a mistake, I set in motion snowball. If the legal protectors of the area couldn't be compelled to help out, who was I to step in and do their job for them? Fine, but I think if we are going to take this approach, we might as well go all in. I retrieved another handful of the deactivation tags and handed them to Emma, who looked like I was handing her a pile of wet shit. I think you can figure out what to do with those. You really don't give two shits if the protectorate comes down on us for this, do you? She asked in reply. Nope. Fuck them, you have 2 hours, then we are out of here. I don't like slavery any more than the next person, but this is insanity, she muttered quietly as she hurried away, vanishing in the crowd. You've a kind heart, Kickle chuckled. I rolled my eyes. Knock it off with that shit, we need to be ready to go before everything goes to hell around here. With a curt nod and a rueful smile, Kickle jogged back down the dock toward the Retribution. I stayed for a minute contemplating what I had just set in motion. I wasn't second-guessing my decision to give slaves their freedom, just the way it had to be done. Being the hero for once would have been nice, but this had to be done so nobody could trace it back to us. I had enough enemies and no powerful backers if what I started came to light. Even if I didn't add these tokens, it was already too late to put the cat back in the bag of this slave uprising. So instead of letting it smolder for months or years, it was time to add fuel and see just how hot it burned. People and slaves would die, but that was sometimes the price of freedom. The masters had only themselves to blame for this predicament. With one last look at the quiet bustling town, I turned and headed for my ship. I ran out of compassion and caring for these people after being assaulted, sold out, and ignored. It's no wonder the Federation and the Protectorate were so opposed to each other. At least the attitude of the Federation citizens was based on cultural identity. What was the Protectorate's excuse for being douchebags and asshats at every turn? Power grew complacency, I guess. Well, no matter. Once we riled up the pirates and locals enough, I'm sure my target would finally expose himself, then we could take him down and I would move on from this area. Playing Avenging Captain was fun and all, but the longer I stayed, the more I was getting dragged into the fetid whirlpool of local politics. It was something I wanted to avoid at all costs.